So I just sort of ramble until I think it's safe to start my introduction, which I think we're good to go. Hello, folks. I am Eric, and I still have not figured out the best way to introduce this show. So I'm just going to say this is my favorite horror with author, podcaster, YouTuber, Somer Canon. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Before we get into anything else, there's just a little thing I want to share. I watched a couple of your videos yesterday. I watched your top 10 Stephen King movies.
Mm-hmm.
Had some great choices on there. Although I do have a question in a moment. But I also watched your Halloween movie list. Was that
Mm-hmm.
what it was called? Or October movie list?
Yeah.
Very excited by one of the movies that you mentioned. I don't know. I might be too close to the camera for this, but you did have this on your
Dr.
list.
Giggles, oh my God.
And I have it autographed. So it's
That's amazing. I love that.
very excited to hear someone giving it some love.
That movie's so freaking weird. There's like a handful of like fucked up doctor movies out there, like The Dentist is one. And
Right.
I think those are some of the most, like, if you're gonna go kind of tongue in cheek with a slasher movie, going the doctor route just always seems to work out really well.
Well, I love the movie. Larry Drake was incredibly kind. And I had a tough time a little bit choosing between having him sign a Dark Man or the Dr. Giggles, but I figured he's a supporting character in Dark Man. He is Dr. Giggles. Let's go with that one. And I don't know that many people went with Dr. Giggles. He seemed happy that that's the one I chose.
It's a great movie. That would be the one I'd be screeching about. I would also want to talk to him about what was the weird ass where he's like the FedEx driver. It's not a horror movie, it's a comedy. I think it's called Overnight Delivery. He's really funny in it.
Something. Yeah, he was great. And like I said, he was incredibly gracious. I met him at Horror Hound I think that's the one that was in Indiana. And actually, I think everybody we met there was just really, really nice, which is always great when you meet folks and they're very gracious, especially when it's the third day of a convention and I'm sure they're very tired.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. When you get the big name people who, if you're standing in their line long enough, you see the awkward people who come to their table and will stand and talk to them for 20 minutes. And you can see, like, they never break character. They're always awesome. I've done conventions and sat close enough to movie celebrities to watch how they are. And there are some that they're just cool and professional the entire time, and they always gain a new level of respect with me when I can see how great they are with their fans, because some of them aren't.
I've heard stories. Like I said, fortunately, I have not had that experience. And I try as much as I would love to just stand and talk. Of course, if there's a line, I don't want to take up their time and block everybody that's in the line. But and I was we have a local convention here twice a year called Cinema Wasteland. Here being near Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
And I was there with my sister, and I want to say William Forsythe, I think is his name, from The Devil's Rejects.
Yep.
Yeah, he was there, and he was walking, I think, away from his table, and just happened to walk past us and looked over, and he's like, "Hey, how you guys doing?" And my sister was like, "Oh my God, he just talked to us. He was just walking by and he talked to us."
I saw him at a Monster Mania once, and he was really cool there. The Monster Mania over here, we're Eastern PA here, but they do Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and Hunt Valley, Maryland, which is really close to Baltimore, and they get just the best movie celebrities there, the nicest people. I've only seen a couple stinkers where they're not don't want to be there, and you can see it on them. Everybody else there was just, they're enthusiastic, they want to talk to you, they're great on the panels, and I love to see it. I love to see when they get why they're there.
My only other one like that, I suppose, and I did get William Forsythe's autograph at a different horror hound that he was at. Got him to sign my Devil's Rejects. But we were at my nephew, niece-in-law, and myself were at Horror Hound in Cincinnati. We were getting ready to leave. It was Sunday. We were done with everything, and we were buying these horror-themed sodas. And the table was set up so that if you were at that table, Kane Hodder's table was right behind you. And I had purchased my little, I think it was a 4-pack of different sodas, waiting for my nephew and niece-in-law to buy what they were going to buy. So I was standing back, and Kane Hodder just got up, turned around, and started talking to me. He was waiting for something, and he was like, hey, let's chat, apparently.
Kane Hodder is the best. I think him and Bill Moseley are like the best guys to meet at a convention, because they're so nice and personable, and they treat you like you're a person. Like, hey, how you doing? How's your day been like? I really like those guys.
I have not gotten to meet Bill Moseley yet. That would be a nice one.
Really? Like, Bill Moseley does every horror convention. Every horror convention.
Trying to remember the first 2 times I ever went to Cinema Wasteland, one of them, and I can't remember which was which, but one of them had the victims from Devil's Rejects were the guests, and then one of them, the killers, were the guest. But it was essentially my first time at a convention. I had no convention savvy, and did not get to meet Bill. He was there, and I want to say Sid Haig was there, but plus there were huge lines, of course.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so I would love to meet him. Although my dream convention right now is Scares the Care.
Yep. It's always a good one.
But it's always a matter of getting the vacation time and everything. But yeah, I would love to meet the authors and everything else. I could easily take hundreds of books. As a matter of fact, I have a couple right here that I wouldn't mind getting signed.
Well, I will be at Scares That Care in 2022. I'm reserved.
Nice. So yeah, I loved that you mentioned Dr. Giggles. I wanted to show the poster, which used to be on the wall, but I've redecorated. So it was easy to just pull it out of the closet to show. Now, Stephen King, your top 10 Stephen King movie list. My question is, am I the only person that actually likes the new Pet Sematary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't know. I know a few people who have seen it and just been like, I don't want to talk about it. It was so upsetting. I don't want to talk about it. The things that they changed infuriated people.
I enjoyed it. The thing that infuriated me was that they gave away the change in the trailer.
The trailers suck anymore. Like, seriously, either they tell you nothing or they tell you everything. I can't stand movie trailers anymore.
Yeah, it is. I try to avoid them unless it's a movie I'm on the fence about or know nothing about. Then I want to know something. But if it's a movie I know I'm going to see, I don't need to see the trailer.
Yeah.
But they made some big changes, but I didn't have a problem with it. I just wish it hadn't been spoiled. I'm not saying it's a great movie, but I didn't feel like I wasted my time and money.
Well, you're lucky. I'm one of the people that won't yell at you for that. There are people out there that would be happy to scream at you for that, but I respect it. I dig it. It's fine.
And I'll share this. I like to share this with everybody, apparently. The book, Pet Sematary, for decades, I've been saying is the second most boring book I have ever read. But I reread it after the movie came out, and I absolutely love it. It is one of my favorite Stephen King books now.
Good. That makes me happy.
I have no idea. I just was in the wrong mood. I don't know what it was. I just thought it was so slow and boring. Back when I read it, it was in 1990. I know that because I have a list of every book I've read since 1985. And I actually have a video series where I go through month by month talking about all the books. And I know Pet Sematary just came up in the 90s. So that's when I originally read it and just did not like it. But the reread, I couldn't put it down.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is probably one of his most brutal books. There are parts of that book that are actually uncharacteristically brutal for King. And I think he went places that made him uncomfortable in that work. And it translates to the reader. Like, I think that's one of his more powerful works.
It is, you know, like I said, I just think it's fantastic now. And I had there was a void of King for a while. After Misery, I just could not get into anything I tried to read by him, and came back around Under the Dome, and now pick up pretty much everything the day, if not the day, at least the week it's come out, and try to read it. Although I still I have that gap to fill. I'm actually
Yeah.
reading Mr. Mercedes right now.
It's a good one. It's a really good one. It's the thing about King that's really great is how consistently Stephen King he stays. He doesn't try any new tricks. He is always going to be Stephen King. And you're two paragraphs into this new book, and it's like wrapping yourself in a warm, familiar blanket. And it's like, I know this, and I know even if this isn't one of his best, I'm still going to like it.
Well, it's the rhythm of his writing,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but that's how I feel. Now, have you read The Outsider?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not going to spoil anything when I say I read that when it came out and absolutely fell in love with Holly, which is why I immediately went out and bought the 3 Mr. Mercedes or Bill Hodges books
Mm-hmm.
so that I could read more of her character, because I think she's my favorite King character at this point.
He's just one of those writers. He does a really good job with female lead characters. And not a lot of male writers always get it right. There's always maybe a little too much curiosity about sexuality, maybe a little too much relying on stereotypes. And he certainly does that every now and then, but I find myself relating hardcore to his female characters. I think he does a fantastic job.
Excuse me. So let's see. Everyone tells me I should read the Dark Tower series.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with this?
All right. If you like fantasy, you'll like the Dark Tower series. If you're not a fantasy person, it's a commitment. It's a long series, and they're all big books, except for I think the Gunslinger. I think the Gunslinger, the first one, is the shortest. If you're not really into fantasy, this isn't for you, because it's a very complicated story with a lot of world building. That's a thing about fantasy. If you don't like the world building, if you don't like hearing about landscapes and new laws and stuff like that, it can get tedious. But this is a straight up, very traditional fantasy series. And it does tie together a lot of his other works, especially the short stories. But I mean, if you're not into fantasy, you're not going to like it. If you like fantasy, give it a try.
I used to be a huge fantasy fan, and now I'll read it here and there. I have read The Gunslinger 1.5 times. And was not thrilled with it. Everyone tells me I have to get through that and get to Drawing of the Three. So I may give it a shot. I actually just picked up It for the first time. I've never read that, so I have to dive into that one of these days.
That's one of the, like, if you want to be mad at all the movies made about it, read the book, and you're going to be like, what? You know, the movies haven't even tried to get this story right. I mean, be prepared for pure anger, but it's a great book.
Well, I've seen the miniseries, the original.
Hmm.
Saw it when it was on. I've only seen it chapter one of the new ones. I actually just got chapter two on Saturday. Max Booth told me I wasted my money.
I'm going to agree.
It was $7.50. I want to at least finish watching the story, so we'll see.
You could have got a value meal at McDonald's and would have been money better spent. This
Wow.
movie is bad. It's
I've
bad.
heard I've heard people say it's not as good as chapter one, but I haven't heard that it's that bad before.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I watch a lot of cheesy horror movies. I watch a lot of bad horror movies. It's part of, my job with the Ghost Writers podcast. Rarely am I mad about my time wasted on a movie. And chapter 2 made me angry. I was like, can
Wow,
I get a refund on the time I just wasted?
interesting. That is very interesting. Well, since you mentioned Ghost Writers podcast and bad movies, were you one of those who watched Carousel?
I didn't watch it. No.
I actually just the director sent me a link to watch the sequel because I haven't picked that up yet on DVD. I'm actually a fan of that director. I've met him a couple of times. He's been to Cinema Wasteland. I bought Carousel directly from him. They were showing it that weekend at Cinema Wasteland. I love it. I mean, it's a bad movie. It's low budget. It's goofy, but I think it's such a great time. And there were parts where I literally had to pause because I was laughing so hard.
I think there is a renegade spirit to horror that a good storyteller can manage a really good movie on a low budget. I think, as long as it's a good storyteller, you can still get a passable movie on almost no money.
Well, I love super low budget independent horror. Mike Lombardo, of course, his shorts, and then The Stall, and then I'm Dreaming of a White Doomsday. I love all of that. Chainsaw Sally. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Mm-mm.
Um, it's a just super low budget slasher revenge vigilante movie. Gunnar Hansen has a tiny part. Herschel Gordon Lewis has a tiny part. And they made two seasons of an internet show. There's the movie, two seasons of an internet show, another movie it's Groundhog's Day, Chainsaw Sally, or something like that. Um, and there's another director who I can't remember his name, but his movie that I love is Puppet Monster Massacre, which is a horror movie with essentially Muppets.
Oh my God, that sounds awesome.
And it's got foul language and nudity and puppet gore, I guess. And it is so funny. All of the characters are named after famous horror directors, and I just love that stuff.
I think it's funny when people don't take horror too seriously and let it be fun. It works out if you've got the right spirit. It can really work out.
Um, so let's see. I wanted to talk about. We're going to skip to your other podcast, The Case for Classics. Thank you for reminding me of that. I knew it was something classics. But actually, I just have a question. I'm going to put you on the spot. If you had to just recommend three classics that I have to read, what would they be?
The Odyssey,
Okay.
the Inferno from the Divine Comedy. Don't read all three parts, just read the Inferno. And pick up a collection of Robert Frost poems.
I was hoping you'd at least say one thing that I've actually read, because I've not read any of that. So why those three?
The Odyssey, as opposed to the Iliad, which they're a pair of books. The Iliad covers the Trojan War. The Odyssey covers the trip home from the Trojan War. And I think the Odyssey better conveys the goodness in man. It's a an epic story about the erroneous nature of man. You know, we fuck up, we're not always great. And Odysseus, he fucks up, he's not always great. He's an epic hero, but he is very distinctly human. And this is a story about him falling and rising up, his conquering. You know, he's royally pissed off one of the gods, and this is keeping him from getting home in a timely manner, and yet he still does it. It's a story of just, it's a human story about human nature and human endurance. And this is one of those stories, if I had to be on a deserted island, this is one of the books that would be coming with me, hands down. With the Inferno, this is a book I've read so many times. Sometimes it was for homework, sometimes it wasn't. I think the story is so funny because never underestimate an Italian's ability to be petty. And that's everything about this book. It's he's mad at certain people and he puts them in hell, but also there's a very wonderful OCD quality to this book about how hell is laid out, how it's categorized. Like, Dante was the kind of guy you would want organizing your home office because everything would be organized to the letter. And it's one of those stories. It's great for looking at the time in which it came out. This is a pre-Renaissance story. And you're seeing a man who is very bitter. He is living in a time that's embattled by wars, a lot of political shenanigans going on, and he's very angry, and it shows in this story. But it's also kind of delightful because of that, if that makes sense. And Robert Frost poems, Robert Frost is one of those poets that he is accessible to everybody, even people who don't get poetry. You're going to be able to get and digest a Robert Frost poem. If you've never read poetry and you want to get into it, I think he's a great place to start.
All right. I'll put those on my long, long list of things to read. I was hoping for something like Jane Eyre or Crime and Punishment, or, like I said, something I've read.
I did a whole series on the Russian novelists, and Crime and Punishment. Oh my God. So I can't with that book because the ending makes me want to scream. I won't spoil it for anybody, but I mean, I'm lucky it was an ebook that I was reading at the time, or I would have thrown it. But it's nice because I think sometimes people think the whole point of the podcast was because I was talking to people who hadn't read certain classics, and they all think it's homework. You get it mixed up with it being homework, and it's like, no, these are still books. These books still have entertainment value. And I read Crime and Punishment, and it's a very long, tedious book, but I was still entertained. I was still enraptured with the story, so much so that I got very worked up with the ending. I was very, in tune with what was going on, so that when it ended in such a disappointing way, I had a reaction. And this is a book that, unless it was on a syllabus and saying, if you want to pass this class, you have to read this, you probably wouldn't. But my point is, maybe you should. It's a good book. Give it a try.
Well, I did not read 95% of the things that were assigned to me in school. As far as that, things like that. I did read a little Dickens. I believe I read Great Expectations. But most of that stuff I didn't read. I was reading my own stuff. It was after school that, when it was my choice, that I started reading all sorts of different things. I haven't read War and Peace, but I have read some Tolstoy. I did prefer Dostoevsky. Hopefully I've said that correct, at least close to correctly.
Yeah, you're good.
And I kind of going back to the Pet Sematary thing, where I always said that was the second most boring book I've ever read. I've already upset one person by saying this, but Jane Eyre is still, I say, is the most boring book I have ever read. I just did not enjoy it.
A great thing about Jane Eyre, your viewpoint is totally valid. I totally get it. I've read it, and I've read it enough times to see where you're coming from. I'm not mad about it. I disagree, but I'm not mad about it. The thing about Jane Eyre is it's a surprisingly divisive book where, you know, Mr. Rothschild, is it Rothschild? I
Oh,
might
it's
not have that.
so long I can't remember
The
any.
main dude.
Mhm.
I've seen fights break out about this character. I mean, fights, because some people are so charmed by it, that dark brooding nature, and other people are like, no, this guy's fucked in the head, you don't want to be in a relationship with him. And it's got this strange characterization where you can get a conversation going about it, but I get it. It can be kind of a slog in places. It's very slow moving. It's got that English Gothic thing going for it where everything's gray and drab. It's
Well, when you were describing the main guy there, you could have been talking about 50 Shades of Grey. He's so charming and attractive, but no, you don't want to be in a relationship with this guy. From what I've heard and seen, I have not read them. I've read excerpts and I've seen a lot of things about it. But speaking of charming and dangerous, I guess we'll just skip ahead to your choice for favorite horror, which was, what was it?
the 1985 version of Fright Night.
There we go. And I was just rewatching it and thinking how incredibly charming Jerry Dandridge is.
Yes.
But before we get into all of that, if there's anybody watching this who is not familiar with this movie, can you give us a quick synopsis?
It is it's a story about a horror loving teenager named Charlie Brewster. And he gets a new neighbor. And he starts noticing things are a little weird about this new neighbor. He sees them carrying this strange long box in the night. He sees women going to the house, but he doesn't see them coming back out. Trash bags being taken out in the middle of the night, just strange things going on. And he comes to the very logical conclusion that, oh, my next door neighbor is a vampire. And the problem being, he's right. So it turns into this kind of showdown because the vampire at first is very much, leave me alone. I know you know what I am. Leave me alone. Let me do my thing and I'll move on. But Charlie won't let it alone. And he ends up pissing off the vampire and things go very wrong.
Yes. I had forgotten that he was given that choice, that Jerry Dandridge does say, I could kill you, but if you forget about me, I will forget about you. And apparently, depending on your point of view, Charlie Brewster makes the wrong choice.
I think that's a very important part of the plot, that when you get too caught up in this being just a monster movie, if you forget that part, if you forget the part of Jerry holding him by the neck and going, I don't have a choice here. Forget
Right.
about me and I'll move on. And he's being very magnanimous here because he could be very pragmatic and just kill the little snitch and be done with it. But he doesn't. I'm only going to stay here a little bit longer and then I'll move on and your life will go back to normal. Leave me alone. And I think if Charlie hadn't been a teenager, I think an adult would have been like, yeah, sure, I don't see anything.
Yeah.
But because he's
I don't know what you're talking about.
because he's an impulsive teenager, and he brings all his friends into it too. Like, what an asshole.
And why was this your choice for our discussion?
This is my favorite vampire movie. Hands down, I grew up with this movie. It had been recorded on an old VHS tape. I think I actually still have the VHS tape where it was recorded. This movie, my little brother and I would watch this movie twice a week for years. This movie and House with
Another
William
great.
Katz. Those two movies mean a lot to me. They have a lot to do with my mythological rise as a horror creator. What I love about this as a vampire movie is that it contains that singular monster coming into a small town and slowly infecting it. I'm not a huge fan of the vampire horde or the Vampire Society or
Hmm.
things like that. I like the singular monster slowly overtaking the small town. And they do a good job of talking about it, but not talking about how virulent and transmissible vampirism is in this. Because when he's killing the sex workers, they make a real quick comment that their heads are cut off.
Right.
And it's to keep them from turning. He's being very careful with what he's doing. But when he decides he's fucking done, Charlie has pissed him off, he's going to go all in, then he starts turning people. And it becomes this, you know, Charlie's very small world becomes invaded. And it's dripping with those old school Victorian sensibilities. It goes all the way back to Stoker with the vampire being a symbol for fear of sexuality and fear of transmissible disease. And I love that so much, because I think in the era of the sexy vampire, in the era of the vampire society, we kind of lose that fear of the virulence of it. And I also love about this movie is that it lovingly pokes fun at its predecessors. It lovingly pokes fun at the Hammer movies. It's very respectful. It's sort of like when you're on the outside of a best friend relationship and you're watching two people who've been best friends for decades and how they're sort of lovingly abusive to each other. That's sort of how this movie is to the older monster movies. And I love the character of Peter Vincent. I love who he is as both a performer and a man, how he has to sort of talk him up. I am a Peter Vincent, vampire killer. He has to say it as like a mantra to remind himself. And I think this movie, it's a mishmash of all these weird components that when they're put together, it's such a good story. And in the 80s, this was a thoroughly modern telling of that singular vampire invader, but it worked.
It is. I saw it in theaters way back in the day, and have seen it a few times since then. But it has been a long time until today. I just rewatched it, and I had remembered most of the big things, I think, but there were little things that I had forgotten. Like I said, like Dandridge giving Charlie Brewster the choice, and the how quickly people turned. Evil Ed is a vampire within hours, less than an hour.
It seems like that, yeah.
It's so quick. And then Amy. It's all. I mean the whole big ending is all, or last third of the movie. I don't know, half maybe, is one night.
Yeah.
A huge chunk. The huge chunk at the end is one night, and two people turn
Very quickly. And it seems like Amy's turn takes a little longer. I think because he maybe played with her a little bit before he let her kind of lay and rest, because he had she was some sort of reincarnation of a past love or something.
Hmm.
But I've always thought this movie starts, you get the suave, kind of sexy man who's wandering through town and he's seducing his way to his food. But this turns into a really gory monster movie at the end. Like, there's no more sexy at the end of this movie.
Well, he is, for a big part of the movie, so charming.
Mm-hmm.
And I like I like my evil characters quite often to be that smooth, calm, self-possessed type of character. He doesn't rant and rave. And when they're at the club and Charlie takes a swing at him, he's not even looking at him when he catches his fist. And then he's just like, I'm not, he's squeezing his hand and pushing him down. He's like, I'm not going to kill you. And he's just so calm about it. I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to take Amy.
He gets kind of mad at the bouncers. He's annoyed by the time the bouncers come at him. But you're very right. He is very unbothered. until he's not. When he gets bothered, he gets bothered. But then there's a noticeable change. I mean,
Yes.
the monster makeup, the long fingers, the messed up face. That bat is the most amazing thing I've seen, because it is kind of laughable having these large men, these Christopher Lees being in their opera capes and all of that. And then they turn into a little itty bitty bat and they're flapping around and being annoying. And in this one, we've got this really gross, fleshy skin bat with a monster face, and it's enormous, flying at people. And it's like, why don't we do that more often?
Yeah, that was incredible. I love the way that looks. I thought it was interesting that Evil Ed turned into, it was just a straight up wolf they had.
Yep.
But then once he gets stabbed and he's changing back, the makeup for that, he looks great. And I found it very sad.
That part is heartbreaking. And I have very vivid memories of being a child and watching that scene and bawling. I mean, being heartbroken that Evil Ed was dying, because that part is horrible. And Roddy McDowall does a great job of watching it, and he is heartbroken that this is happening in front of him. It's a very emotional scene.
And with it, I love the guy that plays Ed, who is
Stephen Jeffries.
There you go. And for a lot of the movie, he's very over the top.
Mm-hmm.
Which is great. It works for the character. And I love the fact that he's the weirdo, but he's the one that's telling Charlie Brewster, "You're crazy. There's no such thing as vampires."
Yeah.
But then, despite all the crazy giggling and everything else, when he's cornered in the alley, again, his performance is heartbreaking.
Yes.
He's terrified.
He's very scared, and he knows when he sees him, and that when he meets Jerry Dandridge in that alley, he knows there's no more pretense, there's no more pretending. This is a vampire, and he's coming to get me.
I thought it was fantastic. And then his death scene again, fantastic. And for him to go from that over-the-top performance that one could view as maybe this guy's not a very good actor. He's going too far, but he obviously is good because he turns it.
I think it's also the character. The character is putting on a show because he's someone who has not had a good life. And Jerry mentions that. Jerry mentions that he gets bullied, he gets beaten up, and I'll make sure that doesn't happen to you anymore. And I think the whole obnoxious thing that he does, calling Charlie a fruitcake all the time, it's a cover. It's that annoying little brother thing you're doing to get positive attention.
Absolutely. So I just, again, with this rewatch, it felt like running into an old friend, just seeing all these things again. I love the, now I can't think of his, I just watched it. The Renfield.
Billy Cole.
Yes.
His name is Jonathan Stark. That's the actor's name.
Yes. I enjoyed him. Oh, I must have punched something. I lost my Fright Night. There it is. So I can look up people's names. But yeah, I enjoy his performance. And then Roddy McDowall, I have always been a fan. Of course, Planet of the Apes. I'm a huge fan of Planet of the Apes, although you don't get to really see much of him except in one of them. I believe he plays a human.
Oh.
I feel like it's the fourth or fifth one. It's when they've gone back in time.
I didn't make it through all of them. I definitely saw the first two, but I didn't make it through all of those older ones.
It's been a long time since I've seen those, and I could be wrong, but I feel like he plays a human being on present day Earth. But then he's in The Haunting of Hell House. Just fantastic.
He's fantastic in that role.
Just read recently. Had not read it. One of the holes in my Richard Matheson. But that was an amazing book. But yeah, so I've always been a fan of his, and yeah, he's great at playing Peter Vincent in the movies, and sort of a pastiche on Peter Cushing,
Mm-hmm.
and then playing Peter Vincent, the actor, who, and I love it when he tells me, "Oh yes, I meant it. I believe in vampires," and then he's like, "I lied."
I
You're a
love how he
crazy kid.
carries his vampire hunter case with him everywhere. When he's leaving the studio after he's just been fired, he's got his vampire hunting case with him. And it's like, why are you carrying that around? But oh, I would pay good money for a case just like that. That thing is full of the coolest stuff. And he's got an apartment full of old movie props. Like
Yes.
that little detail is so damn cool, because if you can imagine what like Peter Cushing's house would have looked like if he kept all the stuff from his turn as Van Helsing and as Frankenstein, all the stuff he would have kept, that would be a treasure trove.
As I was watching it, I'm listening to the dialogue, but I'm looking at everything that's on his walls and on the tables and things, because he's got the displays and things hanging up there. And yeah, it's just great set dressing, great from a movie making perspective, but also great for the character. Excuse me. And yeah, you mentioned earlier he has to psych himself up. He's got funny moments. He's got um, heartbreaking moments. He's got heroic moments. He's just got such a great arc in this movie.
When he commits, the thing that's great about him is when he commits to doing this, he's all in. He does get over the fear, and he actually chases the vampire. And that's great, because that happens in the first Hammer Dracula, with Peter Cushing chasing Christopher Lee. It's one of the very dramatic scenes of that movie. And then we've got little Roddy McDowall, who's been scared to death this entire movie, chasing after a very monstery looking Chris Sarandon. It's a great scene.
Excuse me. It is. Let's see. Well, all right. While I try to think of something, are there any particular scenes, performances, anything that you want to point out or talk about?
We got to talk about Amy's mouth at the end of the thing. I yes, that scene, for as many times as I've seen this movie, I have never watched this movie and not gotten real close to the TV and going, how did they do that? How did they get her mouth to do that? Because it's enormous. And I mean, it's terrifying. And William Ragsdale's face when she's turned around, she's doing this, and then and she turns around, and when he sees it, he has a real reaction of and it's great, because if we're going to do a monster movie, have someone react to the monster, because I think so many times you see the monster and they spend too much time doing the reveal to the audience and not to the other characters. So seeing a character react to the monster is always a really great experience for the watcher, I think.
I love that. I love their reaction when Billy Cole, after he's been shot in the head and they think he's out, their reaction when he gets back up and he walks up behind them and they hear the stairs and they turn around, and I mean, I just think that all the performances are great.
Yes.
It is a very 80s movie.
It is.
Especially the music. Some of the music, at certain points, I was like, this could fit into an 80s action movie. This could fit into almost any 80s movie but a rom-com, and maybe even that if it had, I don't know, the right type of scene. So it is.
There were definitely rom-com scenes between Charlie and Amy. They're like, especially in the beginning with their little lover spats crap. And those are honestly some of the more boring scenes in the whole movie. I think this movie, it is very 80s, but I like how when they're in the house, they are on monster hunter duty at this point, and they're in the house, and it sounds like someone is on a harpsichord. And that's what the music is. It's this very dead, plucking sound of music in the background, especially on that Billy Cole scene. That whole decomposition scene, which is so weird, like lives on in my head as one of the best what's happening here scenes, because it's so gross, it's so random, and and once you've seen that, you never forget the guy where he realizes what's happening, and he starts sounding gross. He's like, ah, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. And the way they do it, they stake him, and he's just sort of standing there, and then they cut to the something green dripping on the floor and a little bit of a puddle forming. And that's the first thing you see. And then it cuts to him and he starts to make those weird noises and lifts his hand up and you see it dripping. And then it just all goes to hell until his bones just fall down the stairs. It's fantastic scene. And even Billy, he hardly has any lines, I don't think.
No, it's usually little quips intimidating Charlie, like "I'll see you later, kid," and stuff like that.
But he doesn't have quite the charm of Jerry Dandridge, but he's still essentially a very cool, even keeled, but still menacing character.
Absolutely. He's definitely got that, not creepy. I wouldn't call it creepy, but there is something of like a mob enforcer type to him where you can tell he's Jerry's day dog. You come near this house, I'm going to break your neck. And I think he acted it perfectly well. It was really one of those performances that's underdone to the point of perfection.
And I love the fact that he and Jerry can just laugh together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're friendly. Jerry doesn't treat him as I said earlier. I called him a Renfield, which I don't
Mm-hmm.
think is accurate. And they behave as if they are friends.
Roommates. They call each other roommates,
Right.
and they act like roommates.
Jerry doesn't treat him as a lapdog.
No, not at all. They do act like they're friends.
Um. Oh, I had something. It flew out of my head. Um. I don't know. It's such a great film. Uh when Charlie is the first time he's sort of preparing for the potential invasion of Jerry Dandridge, and he just nails the window shut, and he's got his little cross, and his mom calls him downstairs, and the
And he's
reveal
down there.
comes down the stairs and around the corner, and you see an arm and a leg of someone sitting in the chair, and he gets up and it's Jerry, and I would never come over uninvited, but now that I have been invited, I'll be over all the time.
Oh, and his mother is so smitten with him. She's always like, "Oh, Jerry, oh, anytime you want to come over." And he's like, "Oh, great."
Be seeing you soon. And again, he's such a charismatic character.
And I think Chris Sarandon was a great choice for this part because he cut his teeth doing stage work. But he does a really good job as a TV actor, like on screen, because he knows when to pull it back. So when he's pretty Jerry, when he's the sexy version, he's really underdoing it a little bit, and it's all about face work. When he's monster Jerry, that's when stage actor guy comes out. He's doing that weird talking thing he does. He did it a lot in The Princess Bride when he played Humperdinck, the way he talked. And it doesn't sound the same because they've got these big teeth in their mouths, and you can tell
Right.
the actors are having a really hard time talking around these gigantic teeth. But he turns into a stage actor when he's got the monster makeup on. He's not trying to be charming anymore. It's a little ridiculous because for some odd reason he's less menacing as the monster than as the good-looking man because
I
of
can
the
see
way
that.
he's kind of screaming at them. But I think he was a good choice because of the two ways he plays it.
We haven't talked too much about Amy. Amanda Beers.
I
I'm
think
not
it's
sure how
fierce.
Beers. Probably best known for Married with Children
Mm.
as Marcy Darcy. Um, but this is probably the first thing I saw her in. Probably the
Same.
first thing I saw William Ragsdale in, although I always remember him from Herman's Head. And actually, I noticed this when I put this in to watch. His name, William Ragsdale's name, is not on the front of this box.
Well, he's the star.
It's Chris Sarandon, Roddy McDowall, and Amanda Beers.
That's weird.
Yeah. I was like, wait, what? That is odd. But I liked her performance. Hers is probably the least standout, though, except for maybe the mom, who has the smallest part, I would say. But I mean, I don't want to relegate her to just the romantic interest.
She's also the damsel in distress. I mean, this isn't a meaty part for a woman. That she's the girlfriend who is causing trouble, and then she's the damsel in distress. The part where she's interesting is where she and Eve will go out to try to get help for Charlie, where they pay off.
Oh yeah.
Where they pay off Peter Vincent to try to come and put on the show to get Charlie to calm the hell down because they think he's having some sort of weird ass delusion. That is where she's most interesting. That is the part where she is a strong character, but then it kind of goes away because the vampire gets a crush on her and decides to turn her.
I like the dynamic between her and Ed in those scenes. Until Ed decides to walk down the dark alley.
Yeah. Yeah. I that whole part was really great because he would tease her about being in love with Charlie and she'd smack him or he'd, flinch away.
Yeah, he's like, ah.
I always thought that part in Peter's apartment, that whole part is one of the best scenes in the movie just because it shows so much. The other part that is really great, the scenery, is Jerry's house. This creepy ass and yet beautifully ornate house in which he lives. And the whole foyer is full of cuckoo clocks. Full. Yes. So that, there's no mistaking when it's time to get back in your coffin because the sun is coming up. I always thought that little detail was really cool.
And of course, that stained glass window at the top of the stairs.
Yep.
It's just beautiful. One of the things I noticed, I think it's on the Special Viewing Unit podcast, which is a podcast about Law and Order Special Victims Unit. They've pointed out, if you want to tell who the asshole is in a movie, it's the person eating an apple. And Jerry does a lot of apple eating in this movie.
I met these guys at a Monster Mania. I got my poster signed by Stephen Jeffries, William Ragsdale, and Chris Sarandon. Amanda wasn't there, and Roddy was gone by this time. But I sat in on a panel that they did, and someone asked, I was like, what was up with the vampire eating the fruit? And he had done research on bats and found fruit bats and was like, that would be kind of an interesting little detail just to kind of show his oneness with the animal part of him. I still think it's weird. Like, I get the explanation. I still think it's weird. But you don't see vampires munching down on fruit. You don't see them, chopping up apples or peeling oranges ever. There's a lot of this movie you don't see.
I like that explanation. And I did notice it seemed to be apples mostly, but there is the one scene where he eats an orange. And there may be something else that I missed. But because of what they had said on that podcast I listened to, and then I see him eating the apple, and then he tosses it to Charlie when Charlie's hiding in the bushes.
And he took one bite out of it and ate the whole core out of it in that one bite. That's the part where it's like, what?
Huge piece missing.
Yeah.
I had forgotten that there was nudity and profanity in this movie. I would have guessed it's rated PG-13 before rewatching it. Because again, it's been so long since I've seen it. And I knew there was a little bit of gore, although it's not a very gory movie.
Not really. The goriest part, I think, is Ed and Jerry Cole when they kind of meet their end. It's kind of a messy end.
Yeah. So is not to jump straight to the ending. We're kind of jumping all around. Is Evil Ed alive and in the house next door?
I mean, I wish that part when I was a little kid, I hated that they killed him. I really hated it. As an adult, I think it was a good choice, and I would prefer if he stayed dead. If we're going to go by the sequel, Ed's dead. He's gone.
I have only seen the sequel one. Well, actually, technically one and a half times. Because the first time I went to see it, I was out in California. It was in Santa Maria, I believe. Could have been Lompoc. One of the two places I went to see movies when I was out there. And the film broke halfway through.
Oh,
So we had to get vouchers or whatever and go back to see it another time. So I don't remember anything at all about that one. I had a thought though when I was watching it today. Jerry, Billy Cole melts. Jerry essentially blows up. But the last we saw of Ed, he was a dead teenage boy with a hole in his chest.
yep.
And I was thinking, how are they going to explain this to anybody?
I
This is
that,
this
that's
might be a bigger problem than having a vampire next door. You've got a dead kid in your house.
well. Also, I mean, if you really want to think about it, if you want him to still be alive, pulling that, what was it, a banister, a spoke from the staircase, pulling that out might have reversed the dead thing.
I thought about that too when they pulled it out. And I think it might have been a leg from the table that
Yes,
Peter
because he
Vincent
fell
fell
and
into.
knocked over that. That's right.
But there was all sorts of broken wood all over that house.
They messed up that house big time. I mean,
And I,
and Charlie's mom has a tendency towards hysterics anyway. I can't imagine she's going to have a cool head when she comes in and sees all this mess in her house.
but she is kind of oblivious at times.
Yeah.
So she may come in from that third shift job and just stumble into her room and fall asleep and not even
She,
notice.
there's like this car getting destroyed outside, and she's talking about this dream she had where she was at the mall naked.
Yeah.
She's kind of a
What was
funny
your dream,
character.
Charlie? Oh, nothing. He's like, it was just raccoons in the garbage. And he even says something about the neighbor has fangs, and she's like, that's nice. And then he runs out, and then she's like, wait, what? Fangs? Just fantastic. I think it holds up wonderfully. I may have to add this to my regular rotation. I went out and bought this on Saturday. Uh,
Yay!
just for this. And it's because there are plenty of movies I should have that I don't. Um, and I think this is the one I could have paid to rent it on Amazon Prime, I think. It was like $3.99 or something. But I like having my physical media. Although there's no special features on this one, which is disappointing. I love my special features. Now, have you seen the remake?
I have.
And what? Just quickly, any thoughts on that?
I think, it's a remake that respects the original. I didn't necessarily care for it, but I think I was too old for it by the time it actually came out. Um, the teenager story when you're in your mid 30s is kind of like yawn. Don't make me watch another one of these. I grew up with this one. I grew up with the 85 one, and it sort of imbued into my genetics at that point. The new one, I didn't like it, but I'm not offended by its existence or anything. I just think there was a very narrow window where it was going to affect me the way it was meant to, and it missed it.
Well, I don't think it has the charm that this one does.
Hmm.
Which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I love the cast.
Oh yeah.
I like Colin Farrell. I like Anton Yelchin, R.I.P. Chris Sarandon has a little tiny part.
Yep.
Evil Ed is gone, is killed so quickly
Yeah.
in it. And I do like the fact that Jerry Dandridge, is that his name in the remake? Do you recall?
I think so.
Still, never gets invited into the house, and so just sets it on fire.
Yeah.
I like that idea. That, yeah, he can't get into you. He'll make you come out to him.
And I liked the idea of what they did with the character of Peter Vincent. I liked the idea of it more than the execution of it. It was a neat retelling of the performer put in a weird place of having to put up or shut up with who you are. It didn't work out for me the way it should have. I think Colin Farrell did a really good job, and he definitely has to be the sexy vampire. You know, he can do that. The 85 version is just, it's really, like I said, it's this weird confluence of different balls to the wall, wacky parts that weirdly worked. And I think it was just one of those lightning in a bottle things, because this one, it didn't try for super wacky like the original did.
Right.
The original was not at all afraid to be completely weird. And this one tried to be a little more traditional, and it is a little boring as a result.
Yeah, it is definitely just straight ahead horror film.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this one, I mean, it's very much a horror film, but again, there's a charm to it. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah.
An 80s charm, maybe?
80s charm. It is very of that time. If you tried to put that movie out in the 90s, it would have been put in the trash can so fast. But because it came out in the 80s, because it had the wholesome teenagers, having their teenager experiences, it worked somehow.
Well, I was a teen in the 80s, so I was the perfect age for so many of the classic films that came out at that time. The slashers, I was there for the original runs. I just yesterday was just talking to Max Booth III. We talked about Evil Dead 2, and I got to see the original Evil Dead at the drive-in when it was brand new, which is just, I'm glad that I got to do that. I wouldn't mind being a little younger right now, but
I'm actually jealous of that experience. That would have been a great time.
My nephew, the one that's gone to Horror Hound with me, his one thing is he wishes he could have seen the original Star Wars in the theater. He's a huge Star Wars. I'm a Star Wars fan as well, but he's huge Star Wars fan. And as a matter of fact, I don't think he's seen anything other than the special edition. And so he's like, yeah, I missed out, and he missed by decades. But he's like, yeah, that's the one thing I really wish I could have seen when it was new in the theater.
Yeah,
and it
would have been nice to see those movies before they had the cultural impact that they did, before they existed in the zeitgeist at all.
I remember getting in to see, I was either 15 or 16 and got in to see American Werewolf in London. I don't know how, because some of my friends who were the exact same age, actually slightly older than me, weren't let in. But somehow I got in to see it. I was a little bit backwards. I saw Friday the 13th Part 2 before I saw the original. Because that was out in theaters. I saw that, and then I had to wait for the original to be on HBO before I could watch it. It wasn't in theaters anymore. So I did see a few. I think might have seen Halloween 2 before I saw Halloween. I don't remember. But I mean, it was a heyday. I mean, there are some great horror movies coming out now. Every decade has had some good horror movies, some not so good, but it just feels like the 80s was a heyday. That there was a lot of special things being made and being done.
Totally agree. I mean, I was born in 83, so I grew up with these movies being, the thing is, when I was born, because I don't think I saw a lot of the sequels before I saw the first. Like, I think the first Halloween that I saw was the third one. And then I didn't see the first Friday the 13th until I was a teenager. I had no idea that Jason wasn't the main killer in the first one. I saw, I think Dream Warriors was the first Nightmare on Elm Street I ever saw, because you were at the mercy of what TBS and TNT were showing. HBO, God bless them, that was where you could see stuff unedited. USA Up All Night sometimes would show those horror movies, but I mean, you were at the mercy of what they were showing or what was at the rental store. And horror movies always seemed to be the first to go in my town, so it was a crapshoot there. So, but you got a taste for that kind of horror, but you also got a taste for these sort of irreverent sequels that they really, to a certain point, just start making fun of you for watching it. You know they are.
Mhm.
And but you get a taste for it. You start to really enjoy it. And I talk about this a lot. There was a sort of glee with the way those movies were delivered to the audience, where it was like, oh, you're gonna shit your pants with this one. And I like that. I like that a lot more than the whole, oh, this movie's going to make you think. This is going to be a whole history lesson. And oh, and it's like, oh, come on, can't we have a fun movie for once, please?
I just feel like I'm bragging now at this point, but like I got to see in the theater original run, like Terror Train, April Fool's Day, Happy Birthday to Me, Alone in the Dark, I think is what it was called, with Jack Palance and Donald Pleasance and Martin Landau.
Oh,
I think
geez.
that's the one. Um, again, all those classics. And then would catch, if I missed it in the theater, I'd catch it on HBO. Growing up, before all of that, we had here in the Cleveland area, we had Big Chuck and Houlihan on Friday nights, which became Big Chuck and Little John, and they were horror hosts. They'd show, or movie hosts, because it wasn't always horror movies. Sometimes it was Sherlock Holmes. But they had they'd show the movie. They'd have a little funny skit at the commercial breaks, which as a child I liked because I'd get so scared watching the movie, and then I had this nice little, I could have a laugh before I got scared again. And that was where I saw most of the Hammer films that I've seen. They showed all the Hammer films. I most vividly remember Dracula versus Billy the Kid, or Billy the Kid versus Dracula, whichever way the title goes. And the one thing that stuck out was that he, at the end, have you ever seen it?
I have not seen that one.
At the end, he carves a cross on his bullet.
Oh,
And that's how
that's
he defeats Dracula. But got to see all those, and the Blob, and the Man with the X-ray eyes. And then we had Superhost on Saturdays, who would show, they were more the old science fiction stuff than horror, but loved watching that. I saw old Roger Corman movies, and just grew up with horror, and then was the perfect age to see this new wave of slashers and everything in the theater. And Fright Night was one of them.
That's incredible. I'm actually really jealous of that, because honestly, most of the Roger Corman movies that I've seen, I saw back when the Sci-Fi Channel, back when their spelling still made sense. They used to show old sci-fi movies like on Friday nights and Saturday nights, and it was quite often old Roger Corman movies. And that's where I saw most of them, was when they would show that kind of stuff. And I miss those days where you could watch the old stuff. Like now we've got like Sven Gulli still will show the old stuff, but it's one night a week. And I mean, I need more because it's a
We
pain in
have
the ass trying to find Hammer movies now. You can't, it's really hard to find Hammer movies.
we have here The Mummy and the Monkey. They do a live show on Facebook every Friday, and then they post it to YouTube. And their movies, they're the old, basically public domain stuff.
Mhm.
I think, is it the giant bat, the vampire bats, one with Bela Lugosi? They've shown like that, Plan 9 from Outer Space. but they also have, because they do convention appearances, they meet a lot of independent filmmakers. They have done some like new, super cheap films. Like there was Vampire Ticks from Outer Space or something like that. Because they knew the people that made it and had permission to show it, and they do the funny skits. And so they'll show, they'll chat, and they'll show a skit, and then they'll show part of the movie, and then they'll come back and they'll chat a little bit, show another skit, show part of the movie, and it's not a bad way to spend a Friday night. And of course, since it's on Facebook, there's a live chat on the side, so you can do that.
That's incredible. See, I like the horror is fun. I really like that because I'll watch the heavy stuff. I'll watch as gory as you can make it. I'll sit and watch it. I can stomach it. I've seen it all at this point. But if I'm going to settle in and do something for comfort to kind of take me back, horror is fun is where I want to live.
Absolutely. And like, I love The Witch, and I love Fright Night.
Yep.
And I love Carousel. There's a place in my heart for all of it. And I do think a lot of people talk about, there's been, I suppose, at least I hear a lot of people talk about this, there's been a new renaissance of horror lately. And I have not seen a lot of it. I have not seen Hereditary or Midsommar. I'm not going to go through all the ones I have not seen, but I've seen both of Jordan Peele's movies. I enjoyed both of those. Really liked those. The most recently I saw the new Candyman. And I think there's been some throwback in the independent world to the slashers and things. And there was something else I was going to mention, and now I've forgotten what it was. Oh, well, of course, remakes, which I don't hate that there are remakes, and there are some that I enjoy, and then there are some that are just horrible.
Yeah, I mean, the overuse of CGI versus practical effects, I think, is one of the main problems a lot with these remakes, just because practical effects win out every time. You cannot beat really good practical effects, the artistry of it. And it's not to say that the people who code to make that CGI, I know the time that goes into that. It's not as effective in the horror format, I don't think.
It's too shiny, for lack of a better way to put it. It looks too clean.
Yeah.
I like my horror to look gritty. I like it to look like it's shot on film, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's like you have John Carpenter's The Thing, classic.
Yep.
Again, one I saw in the theater. And then I have not seen the sequel / remake. I mean, people call it a remake, but it's not. It's actually a prequel.
Yeah, it's a prequel.
And I've heard some people say it's not a bad movie. They just get angry at the CGI over practical effects. It just doesn't work.
It's one of those movies, it's okay. I don't think I'm ever going to watch it again. I saw it once, and that's kind of enough for me. Whereas The Thing, I watch it twice a year, probably. Like, that movie is legitimately amazing. Just because, and if you're being perfectly honest, some of those practical effects, it's like, oh, that looks weird. But when you're in it, when you're watching the movie, when you're in the story, that part with the Petri dish of blood, I jump every time. And I've seen that movie dozens of times. I still jump. It works.
I'm trying to get my nephew to watch the classics. He's into horror. I've got him reading horror and watching horror. I got him to watch some of the French Extremity, like Martyrs, Frontiers. I can't remember if he watched Inside or not, or High Tension. But he has yet to watch. What's that?
Inside is.
That has one of my favorite scenes from a movie ever at the end.
Yeah.
It's horribly disturbing, but I
Yep.
absolutely love it. But I'm trying to get him to. I've got to get him to watch the classics. He says he wants to, but he hasn't seen The Thing. He hasn't seen American Werewolf in London. He hasn't seen the original Halloween or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. Oh, that was one I was going to mention. I distinctly remember going to the local mall. They had two screens in the mall and going there to see Nightmare on Elm Street, and then there was a Baskin Robbins in the mall, and we went and got ice cream afterwards, and we were blown away by that movie.
That's another one. That's a series. If I, there's two camps, it seems to be two warring camps about Friday the 13th versus Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm in the Friday the 13th camp, even though those get completely ridiculous. My problem is with Nightmare on Elm Street. The first one is so goddamn good that character that is so weird. He is a weird character, but he's effective. He turns into a cartoon later when he really becomes a parody of himself in later movies. And it's actually kind of it's not fun the way, Jason becomes kind of laughable. It's sad watching Freddy Krueger become that because he was so good in the first one.
Well, the first one is so terrifying.
It is.
Just absolutely terrifying. And then, Freddy becomes a comedian quipping one-liners.
Yeah.
Although I do like Wes Craven's New Nightmare and the whole meta of that.
I thought it was heavy-handed, the meta thing. It was like the problem with that is I didn't see it when it first came out. If I'd seen it when it first came out, back when the whole meta thing was a thing, I think I would have understood it more. But I watched it, oh God, maybe 2011 was when I finally got around to watching it, and it was like, oh man, this is ham-fisted.
Well, I think it was relatively rare when it came out.
Yeah.
And I do think, oddly, because I'm in the Friday the 13th camp. Give me Jason all the way. But I think it's the Nightmare movies. I think that's the only franchise where I have seen everyone in the theater.
Wow.
Except the remake. I have not seen the remake. And I hear it's horrible. But
that's one I saw once, and that's enough for me. I don't need to see it again.
But I'm pretty sure the Nightmare movies I saw all in the theater. I remember having the 3D glasses for, what is it, part 6? Freddy's Dead, where they tell you when they're going into the hell or the dream realm, wherever they're going, and they have to put the special glasses on.
Yeah.
And the audience has to put the 3D glasses on. It was horrible 3D effects, but I do distinctly remember that. I don't know. I love Jason. And yes, some of those movies get silly, but I still prefer them to when Freddy is silly.
Yes, I think Jason, the fact that he doesn't talk, for the most part, he has a few, but because he doesn't talk, I think he has that going for him that he, he still gets very ridiculous. But I don't know, I can stomach that one a little more.
Well, they obviously know they're getting silly when they, I don't remember which one it is. I feel like it's New Blood, where they do the James Bond opening.
Oh my, is that New Blood? See, I can't remember what numbers they are. I'm horrible at it. I can't, but I know which one you're talking about. And yes, that one it was like, what is this?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, that's the one with the girl with telekinetic powers.
And again,
which I believe is New Blood, and I think it's 7.
Okay.
Yeah, because 8 is Jason Takes Manhattan, 9 is Jason Goes to Hell. So yeah, it's got to be 7.
Okay. I'm terrible with the numbers. Terrible with the numbers. But I love those movies. I can't help it. And even the remake that they did, I still for the most part, enjoyed it. It was still like, yeah, this is a Friday the 13th movie. They still can do it.
And they kind of incorporated the first three because it starts with the ending of one.
Yeah.
And then you have all sorts of stuff going on, but then it's not until later in the movie that he gets the hockey mask, which is what happens in 3.
Yep.
So you kind of have, not that it follows the plots of any of them, but you just have elements from those 3. What are your feelings on 5, which is the one where it's not Jason?
That's one that maybe I've only seen once. I remember, I have a very specific memory of renting it at our local video store. It was one that was always out. So our local video store, we weren't fancy enough for Blockbuster. It was this cinder block building. It was basically a shed. And it was dark inside. It had like bare bulb lights hanging down from cords from the ceiling. And, you know, the adult section was behind a bead curtain and you could totally see through it and see all the covers and everything. And I remember specifically going with my little brother and my mom and seeing this movie and being like, gotta get this one. Gotta get this one. Haven't seen it yet. And it's, you know, it's one that didn't really stick with me. I remember parts and I remember that Jason wasn't in it and being like, what is this? Did we get the right movie? But I honestly, I didn't absorb a lot of it. I don't remember a whole lot.
See, I happen to like, it's not, like, as a movie overall, it's not great. But I like the idea that Jason is dead and someone else is using that to commit these murders.
Yeah.
And the fact that they changed the hockey mask so you know it's not actually Jason, if you're paying attention. The hockey mask is a little different.
The hockey mask, that becomes a running thing too, where apparently you can tell which movie it is by which hockey mask it is. And it's like, okay, I'm not really paying that close attention.
But and then I like Jason X. I think it's got some very cool kills.
Again, because they're kind of trying to be serious, but they're kind of not. That movie is just weird.
Well, it's got great thing, like he just wanted his machete back. Everything's okay now. Plus David Cronenberg is in it. How can you go wrong with the David Cronenberg seal of approval?
I forgot about that. Oh my God. That
And then we haven't really touched on Halloween. We've gone way off base here, but we haven't touched on Halloween. Are you a fan of those?
No, actually, I'm not.
Okay.
Like I said, I started the first one I saw, and I can't remember which one it was with the niece in the clown suit, where she's in the little clown costume through most of the movie, running away from Michael.
4 and 5.
Okay. Yes, I've definitely seen both of those. I didn't see the first one until much later. I think I was probably a teenager myself when I finally saw that one. And I remember just kind of being like, this movie's boring. There's something, I know that it was one of the progenitors of the slasher genre, but there was something missing from it that I can't quite put my finger on. It just didn't work for me.
It is a very slow movie. I happen to be a big fan. Not as much as the Friday the 13th movies, but I like it a lot. I am a fan of part 3, which has no Michael Myers in it at all.
Yeah.
Just got the masks and everything.
I sing that song to my kids. My kids are like, what are you talking about?
Oh, somewhere. Maybe I don't have it handy. I actually have a clamshell, VHS clamshell, that I don't even remember the place I ordered it from online, but it has like brand new artwork. And then when you open it up, it has like candies and little spider rings and things inside. You know, it wasn't the movie itself, but it was, I got the Halloween 3 one, and it's just got great artwork with the robot people and the masks and everything on it. I thought I had it in a drawer over here, but apparently I've moved it.
I think that one, I think the premise of that one is cool as hell, because the terror of having your kids being attacked. And it's all because of that little tag on the masks that's got a part of, what is it, Stonehenge?
Stonehenge. Yep.
It's this weird story that I think is so neat because, I mean, can you really imagine having, like, in this country, having the children attacked on Halloween like that? Like, the whole world would turn upside down. And it's gruesome. A lot of movies will shy away from child death like that. And they're not
Oh, yeah.
necessarily, because they zoom in so much on the masks as they're melting onto the kids and stuff, you don't necessarily see that, you know, it's the child actor. But when, like, the bugs start coming out and stuff and their face is coming off, it's like, oh, they just killed a kid. Okay.
Love it. That's actually my mother's favorite horror movie. And I got to meet Tom Atkins and get him. I got a picture from that movie and had him sign it for my mother.
That's
Because
awesome.
she loves it. And I have not seen all of the movies in the Halloween franchise.
I haven't either. I stopped at, I think I haven't made it to H2O and on. I stopped before then.
I did see H2O in theaters. I have not seen the one that's got the reality show in the house that has, I think, Busta Rhymes is in it. Um,
I know which one you're talking about. Haven't seen it. I know which one you're talking about.
I haven't seen that one, and I have not seen Rob Zombie's Halloween 2.
I saw the first one. Not as much as I liked Devil's Rejects, and I liked it more than House of a Thousand Corpses. I haven't loved all of Rob Zombie's offerings. I thought Lords of Salem was a good idea, but the way it played out was kind of messy for me. And then I thought the first Halloween, you know, it gets to a point where it's like, okay, I get what you're trying for, but
I think with some of his films, it becomes sensory overload.
yes,
And that's what I
yes.
felt about. I liked his Halloween. I liked, I know this, some people think this is blasphemy, but I liked that he showed Michael Myers as a child and in the asylum. Um, I just like that take on it, you know, and I'm not one of those people that thinks, oh, he ruined the original. Of course he didn't. The
The
original's
original
there.
still
I can watch it
exists.
anytime I want.
Yep.
Um, and I liked that. But once you get to the second half of the movie, when he's broken out and he gets back to Haddonfield and he's killing everybody, it's loud and there's so much piercing screaming, and just visually it overloads the senses. That's the feeling that I got.
I actually 100% agree with that. Like, you put into words what I was feeling. One thing I did like about it, just because it's what you became used to, especially with Jason Voorhees, was, you know, in the original Halloween movies, it was just a very regular guy in, like, a mechanic's jumper. Michael Myers is a big motherfucker in his movie, like, big guy. And it's like, yeah, there we go. That's a slasher.
All right. Okay, before we wrap up, which it's always a long wrap up, but anything else you want to say about Fright Night?
Uh, no, I think we talked a lot about it. It just that it is my favorite vampire movie. Vampires are my second favorite movie monster. Werewolves are my first, but you can't not love vampires. And I love the singular vampire invader in this, and I think because it was done with love for the predecessors and it was done with joy in its heart, you know, it had a lot of fun with itself. I think it is the perfect vampire movie, and a lot of people disagree with me. Boy, I get grief for that, but it will never change. This movie lives on in my heart forever. Favorite vampire movie.
I have a love-hate relationship with vampires. I love Near Dark. I would probably say that is my favorite vampire movie. I do like a little bit of that vampire crowd because I like 30 Days of Night.
That's a great
Um,
movie.
and I love the comic book. I like that movie. But there was a time, oh, and for the longest time, my favorite horror novel was The Light at the End by Skip Inspector,
Mhm.
which is a vampire novel. I've read it a dozen times, maybe. Absolutely. I'm due for a reread. But there was a point in time when my friend actually wanted to make t-shirts. I would say that vampires were the Jar Jar Binks of the monster world. Um, because I like my vampires to be monsters. And there was a time when they weren't. They were these charming, sexy, not that they haven't been, obviously, in Fright
Mhm.
Night. He is very charming and very sexy, but he's also monstrous. And I want my vampires to be monsters. And there just seemed to be a point where they were less monstrous. And it was
Yeah.
more about the romance and how sexy they are. And so they sort of fell out of favor with me. But I'm back. I've been enjoying some vampire stuff. Um, I've been getting. I always gesture at things that people can't see. But over here, I have 4 volumes of the complete collection Tomb of Dracula from Marvel Comics, which is one of my favorite vampire characters. Is Marvel Comics' version of Dracula. Um, yeah, Fright Night is definitely up there as one of my favorite vampire movies. Like I said,
It
with Near Dark
it just does it
and
right. Um, I said that, I prefer the singular, the solitary vampire, but there are, 30 Days of Night is such a good movie. It can't be denied. That's a really good movie. And book wise, like After Age by Yvonne Navarro, that's a really good vampire story. And I Am Legend,
I Am
amazing.
Legend is fantastic.
I really fucking wish they'd stop trying to make movies because they're never going to try to get it right. Just stop. But like that's a horde vampire kind of thing. And God, that story's
With a
so good.
twist.
With the twist, if no movies tried to touch on it yet, it drives me crazy. But I mean, my favorite vampire book is Salem's Lot. And it's for the same reason why I love Fright Night. That singular invader with this very virulent, highly transmissible disease. And that's part of the horror. But with Salem's Lot, it's much bigger. With Salem's Lot, the town is one of the kind of background characters of the book. And oh, I just love that book so much. I'm not mad at some of the romanticizing of vampires. Like I read almost all of the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles. I couldn't finish it. It did start to get a little too much for me. And I read all the Sookie Stackhouse books. I hated the show, but the books are good. It's not bad because even in those books, they're still monsters. They're monsters that like to have sex like rabbits, but they're still monsters. And I don't know. It's the whole society part that gets on my nerves, I think, because then when you get a society, then you start getting politics, you start getting hierarchies. I really like the lone wolf hunter aspect of a vampire. That's my favorite.
Well, I don't know if this will show, if this will show well on camera. If I can get, I have to move around. I have this tattoo, and it's a vampire skull. It's unfinished because of COVID, but it's a vampire skull sitting on some books, and the bottom book, the spines are showing. The bottom says Dracula, and the one above it says Salem's Lot.
That's amazing. I love it.
Um, and eventually, I got to get it finished. But yeah, I don't know if you're aware there was a pandemic, and things shut down for a while.
No, I haven't been homeschooling my kids for almost 2 years now. it's
So yes, it is unfinished, but eventually it will be done, and those spines will look. Hopefully, Salem's Lot will pop. Um, yeah, I like I said, I'm getting back into the whole vampire thing. I have read the Sookie Stack, I 2 or 3 of the Sookie Stackhouse. I can't remember.
Hmm.
I could look at my list of every book I've read since 1985. So I've read at least 3, I think. I've only read Interview with the Vampire from the Anne Rice series, and I don't know, it just didn't do anything for me.
It's not the best of the
It
series,
was,
in my opinion. It doesn't even make the top 5.
and I've only read 2 Anne Rice books, and that was one. The other was The Mummy, which I actually enjoyed.
That's a good one. The Servant, it's Servant of the Bones. That's a good one too. That's not vampire. It's got a weird kind of genie monster in it. And also The Witching Hour. The Witching Hour is a divisive one because it's really long, but it's a family tree kind of book. And I thought it was really good.
But like I said, Light at the End, absolutely love that book. Punk rock vampire, love it. Ray Garton's Live Girls, is that the first one? I think that's in a different room, so I can't just look on the shelf. Um, but I like that one. The thing with like the Sookie Stackhouse and others, I'm not a fan of when monsters or the supernatural are just part of the world that everybody knows about.
Hmm.
I don't hate it, and a well-written book is a well-written book, but I'm not a huge fan of that thing. Of that, I don't know if urban fantasy is. I don't know that all urban fantasy are like that. I think there are
In my
some where,
in my experience, they kind of are. Like Kim Harrison and Jay Wells, their urban fantasies, like the Hollows books and Prospero's War, they kind of follow that formula.
well, I think, like I want to say, like the Jim Butcher, the Dresden books. I feel like as the reader, we're focused on that supernatural society, but it's still the rest of the world isn't aware of it,
Hmm.
or at least, I mean, there are some, human people that are. I liked Kelly Armstrong's books. The Other World, I forget what they were called now, but she started off with a couple of werewolf books, and then moved in. What I liked about hers was, I think like the first 2 books had the same main character, but then the next book maybe took one of the ancillary characters from an earlier book, and they became the main character. And then a couple books down the line, another secondary character became the main character,
Oh,
and
I
she sort
like
of built
that.
this world. I really enjoyed that. So if you haven't read Kelly Armstrong,
That
maybe
can
check
be
that
added to
out.
my TBR mountain.
But oh yes, the TBR. I just got a book cart to try to get a little organized, and it's still barely made a dent in the stacks. I have no shelf space, and I have stacks of books on the floor. But speaking of books, you write them.
I do.
So these are the only 2 of your, I guess, novella and novel that I have.
They're they're both technically novellas. One's just super skinny, the other one's a little less skinny.
But I do have plenty of anthologies with your work. I just got Under Her Black Wings the
Okay,
other
my
day.
Candisha Press one. Yep.
Um, and now you had something in Survive With Me. Is that correct?
Yes.
Which story was it, if you don't mind reminding me?
It was titled Sick Burn.
Hmm. Okay, I do not remember. It has been a while since I read that one.
That's fine. No, you're not offending me at all. Mother with a willful teenager and her scumbag boyfriend.
Ah, yes. Okay, I remember that. And yeah, a little something gets out of control.
Yes.
And yes, yes, yes. I enjoyed that. I do. I think it was Gemma Amore. I think it was her story. There's a Frankenstein story in it that is the one that I remember the most, because Frankenstein is my favorite classic horror novel. Absolutely love it. So that was the story that really stuck with me. So I liked her. Again, I think she's the one that wrote it. I could be completely wrong, but that's the story from that anthology that stuck out. But yes, I do. Now that you say, I do remember Sick Burn. What are you working on anything now?
I'm working on so much right now. So,
Okay.
so I mean, I could tell you what my days are like and why it's amazing. I don't end my days crying. 2 podcasts, 1 YouTube channel, homeschooling 2 boys, taking care of the house. I am putting the finishing touches on a short story collection now. I may be having big news with a publisher soon, and maybe first of the year, again, more news with a publisher soon. So there is stuff coming because the first year of the pandemic, my writing died. The anxiety, the stress of it all, it died. And I'm getting kind of back into the groove now.
Do you want to plug your podcasts and YouTube channel?
Sure. I have a YouTube channel. Just search for Somer Canon. On there, what I like to do is talk about. I like to categorize them. Like, let's talk about my favorite werewolf movies one week, and then the next week I'll talk about my favorite werewolf books. And I really like to try to bring to light indie writers, small press writers and stuff, because I can talk about Gary Bradner's The Howling trilogy all day, but maybe people don't know that Matt Serafini wrote some really great vampire books. And I like to do that. That's what the YouTube channel mostly is, me blabbing very incoherently. Then I have a podcast called A Case for Classics. That is a scripted show so that I don't babble incoherently, but it's a 20-minute at most podcast episode where I make a case for a certain piece of classical literature, try to talk you into it. I'll do a reading from the work to give you a taste for what the piece is like. This past week, I did The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson, horror classic, great book. And then I am on the Ghostwriters podcast. I co-host it with authors Barry San Giovanni and Matt Wilderson. And we have co-host Dave Thomas on. And we talk about nonsense, movies, and we try to finish up with writing advice. It's kind of chaos, but wonderful chaos.
Well, chaos can be fun. Where else can people find, if you care to share, where else can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm happy to friend people on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. I'm a little more stingy with who I friend on Facebook, so you most likely won't get a reply, but friend me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm there. That's usually where I hang out the most anyway.
All right. Well, you'll probably be seeing more comments on your YouTube videos since I've started watching them. And I did look through some of them up there, just kind of scrolled through, and definitely interested in a lot of those. But like I said, I just watched 2 so far. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And talking about this wonderful movie, Fright Night. Let's see. So, folks, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. That's it. Thank you again, Somer Canon. I have been Eric. And until next time, folks, read more books. And